isolated and you got this mean English teacher. And I came from a small high school, so she taught everybody who was going to go to college. So anyway, this mean English teacher made us memorize poem after poem after poem after poem after poem. She'd give us quizzes on it. We could go in, pop quiz, take out a paper, write out the words to such and such poem, or come sit beside me at my desk and recite this poem over and over. She made us memorize the subordinating conjunctions that I gave to you. She made us memorize those subordinating conjunctions so that we would know at the end of an adverbial clause, you got to put a comma. So every time I write an adverbial clause to this day, there's a comma after it. She made us memorize what you call the fanboys, but we learned them in the order and, but, or, nor, for, yet, or so. We had to memorize the linking verbs: is, am, are, was, were, be, been, being, sing, smell, taste, grow, become, feel, look, remain, stay, sound, and appear. I remember them to this day. She would make us sing them like a song. She was mean. She made us just do all kinds of work, diagramming sentences, but especially memorizing poetry. And this is just how mean she was. On the midterm exam, I made 100. Well, nobody makes 100 on this teacher's test exams. Nobody. Well, we had a student teacher. So right in front of the whole class, she calls that student teacher up and says, "Let me see that paper." She looked at that paper and she got through. She said, "It's 100. And that was the end of that conversation. But it's where she would give us poetry and have blanks in it, and we'd have to fill in the blanks. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you why I knew those poems. My older sister, 4 years older than I, had her. I helped my sister memorize them. My boyfriend, who later became my husband, had to memorize them. I helped him memorize them. So, yeah, I kind of knew those poems already and loved them. And so, yeah, I could fill in the blanks on that poetry. She was so mean, though, there was no way I'd made 100 on that poem test. And it wasn't even embarrassing, actually. It made me kind of feel good. But she was mean. She was so mean. And ladies and gentlemen, just a few years ago, this oh, I got to tell you one other part about her being mean. She made people do poetry booklets. Not just 2, 3, 4, 5, like 50 poems. And you would have to find pictures to match the poems. Well, you think, well, that's no big deal. You just go to Google and graphics and images and you find a picture to match. We didn't have such back then. We had to have magazines. And ladies and gentlemen, the neighborhood I came from, not a whole lot of people took magazines. So we'd have to canvass the neighborhood to find magazines, to find the exact picture, because this mean teacher had to have the exact picture to match that poem. And so we'd canvass the neighborhood, would take the entire family to do this project. And not only that, you had to have it in this fancy, fancy cover. Your daddy would go out to the shop and make a wooden cover and engrave it with that, how you burn on stuff and all that kind of stuff. And so here's a story from the Naked City about that. My sister told my daddy the night before her poetry booklet was due, she had to have that kind of cover. You'd have to know my daddy. He went out to the barn. He cut a piece of plywood, big old piece of plywood. And he cut another big old piece of plywood. He stuck holes through them, got her some leather shoestrings, punched holes in her papers, put it together. So the next day my sister goes to school with this big sandwich of plywood and her papers in between to give to her teacher, when everybody else had all this fancy stuff their father had done. But you know what? My sister still got an A on it because we had helped her with those poems and they were just so good and the pictures were so perfect. She still got an A, that mean English teacher. And this is how mean she was. My sister had to do it, my husband had to do it, and now it's my turn to do the poetry booklet. You know what? She didn't let us do the poetry booklet. I was ready for that poetry book. I was looking forward to that poetry book. The mean teacher didn't let us do it. You know why? Because parents had gotten tired of helping their students, their children, with their teenagers with these poetry books. So the county board made her stop. And so I didn't get to do a poetry booklet because of that mean English teacher. Well, I hate to tell you, but a few years ago she passed away. And naturally I went to her funeral. Well, you guys don't know this, but it's true. I'm very shy. I do not speak in crowds. I do not speak in public. I hold my peace, very reserved and quiet. Well, during her funeral, her son got up and read a poem that Mrs. Lambert had written. I said her name. This mean English teacher. A poem she had written, and her last two lines were, it was a long poem, and then the last two lines, and if I have touched just one child, my life has been worthwhile. And then the son stopped and he said, would anybody like to say anything? I don't talk, you know. I'm shy, you know. I don't know what prompted me, but I shot up. I didn't stand up. I didn't plan it. I shot up from the pew in this crowded Presbyterian church, overflowing with people. And I said, I am that one child. Because of her, I have taught English for 40 years. And I sat down. It's over 40 years now, class. And then the woman sitting beside of me, who, by the way, had gone to high school with me, but she was 4 years younger, stood up. And this is what she said. Oh, by the way, she was my student teacher, if I didn't tell you that, also, when I was teaching. So live, that when thy summons comes to join the innumerable caravan which moves to that mysterious realm where each shall take his chamber in the silent halls of death, thou go not like a quarry slave at night, scourged to his dungeon, but sustained and soothed by an unfaltering trust, approach thy grave like one who wraps the drapery of his couch about him and lies down to pleasant dreams. And then she said, I think that's the way Mrs. Lambert lived and died. And she sat down. I know that poem's familiar because you got to write your next paper on it, you know. She said it, applied it to my mean English teacher. And then this man in the very back in the overflow area stood up and recited a poem about as long as Thanatopsis. And I thought, show off. But that's how mean she was. She made us memorize all those things. And all these years later, 40 years, 45 years, 47 years, I still remember these things. I can still sing those songs. I can still love this poetry. That's how mean she was. Because of her, I've taught English for almost 47 years now. But why is this my favorite? Because this mean English teacher read it to us one day. And it came alive to me. It filled my being. I could see it. I could feel it. I was there. I could see the mother. I could see the little boy. I could see the sea. I could feel the entire thing. Even the fact that it was natural for the sea to do this and then act innocence. But I could feel the horror of it. I could see how that mother found her little boy. She just read it in such a way that it has stuck with me all these years and is still, out of all the possibilities in the world of the wonderful things that you listen to and hear every day, that's why this one is my favorite, because of that mean English teacher. And so that is why it's my favorite. Well, one more part on the rubric, and that is the visual aid. Well, you're going to think I'm crazy now, but you already do, so that's okay. My visual aid is just this little simple picture frame with Sea Lullaby enclosed in it. You see the distress frame. You see that there's some plastic taped over it. You see that it's sold. You see that it's almost worn out, but that's okay. Because I'm going to tell you the story of why this is part of my heart that I carry with me. A long time ago, I taught at Johnston Community College, and I did basically this same project with my students, and I shared my favorite poem in the entire world with them. Well, one of my students was a graphic design major, and some of you are IT people. Well, graphic design back then was way different. It was like when you had a big computer in a big room and you had to have all these fans to keep it cool and you had to have dial-up internet. So it was a big deal to make something with graphics. And so he took my favorite poem in the entire world, made graphics around it, and took a frame and distressed it. Whatever you call that. What do you call it? Not decoupage, but I'm asking my daughter-in-law. Anyway, he distressed the frame to make it look old, and he brought it to class, and he gave it to me. Well, now, it doesn't have anything to do with the poem, but it has to do with somebody who cared enough, knowing that it was my favorite poem in the entire world, to make this frame that I still have all of these years later. And I keep it in my office or I keep it at home, but I keep it displayed. And this used to be glass, by the way, but my first grandchild, in her car seat, I had this with the glass on it one day, and I plopped her down on it, and it broke the glass. No child was injured in this. But that is why it no longer has glass here. That's why I put this little piece of plastic on it to try to keep it safe. And it's coming off now because it's been with me to several different offices and at home and to schools to show off to my students. But ladies and gentlemen, when you're looking at just a picture frame with just a poem in it, you're looking at part of my heart. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is my visual aid for my poem. Now, I want you to think about the rubric and the things that I've asked you to include in your presentation and see if I have done them. Well, you had to show the poem and the words, baboon. You had to talk about the literary elements and the effect they had in helping establishing the mood and the tone and the message. So I think I've done that. And then you had to tell why it was your favorite. Did I do that? And then you had to have a visual aid. So, ladies and gentlemen, I ask you, did I incorporate everything that the rubric says we need in this presentation? Thank you for your answers. However, remember, just because I included all of these things might not mean this is an A project. Because remember, we have to think about the quality as well as the quantity. So as you're sitting there, you're assessing whether this is an A, a B, or a C. Hopefully you're not thinking D or F. And that is the way that I will be looking at your projects. And I will be emailing you a rubric for you to look at as well. So ladies and gentlemen, Seed Lullaby by Eleanor Wiley, as presented by Janet Parker. Thank you very much. And thank you to the photographer, Courtney Parker.